This might be the most bonkers Monaco Grand Prix that we have seen in years, and without a single drop of rain in sight, courtesy of the FIA president. Wait, we're thanking him now? Well, that's what the drivers are kinda saying. Now that the media day for the Grand Prix has concluded, the opinions of the racers have been determined. I mean, I don't recall any single driver out there has just turned around to the press and just gone, thanks, I hate it. And for those of you on the fence, I can assure you, this is good news. We can finally be seeing a fun Monaco for once. This is good news. The two-stop rule came from the FIA's World Motorsport Council meeting last year. You would have to stop at least twice. And I bet you that Mr. Sullivan, he is smiling like a Cheshire cat right now because none of the drivers, not even Max Verstappen, has come out saying anything against it. They are receptive to it. Well, I mean, at least not yet, but you know, give it time. If they actually lost out because of this rule, expect on Monday that they will say, oh no, this rule's absolutely terrible. And those who would win, oh, it's the greatest thing. Even the drivers are saying that last year's Monaco Grand Prix was too processional and too boring. It was absolute torture. Even with my boy in second place and almost taking the lead from Leclerc. I was on tenterhooks, but even I was thinking like, wow, nothing else is changing behind. I mean, I will get to a couple of the drivers' opinions which really tickled my fancy in a moment, so do keep watching. But there is another rule, or a loophole closing, that has been handed down which intrigued me. And it's to do with the Nouvelle Chicane. That's the chicane that happens right after the tunnel before a little bit of a blap before you then get to the back. In recent times, it's become one of the more realistic and safer ways to pull off an overtake other than pulling off some heroics into Saint Devote, which you have been told many times that we shouldn't be doing. But it seems like the stewards have been casting their eye on this, and they have been doing their homework regarding this two-stop rule. What this means is that if you cut turns 10 and 11, you must now give the place back before to back. Yeah, give it back before to back, yeah. It completely cuts off that little bit of a period that we saw with Albon and Leclerc around Imola, where Leclerc would be just fighting his case and then quibbling about whether or not they should be giving the place back, but after a couple of laps it's too late, that they managed to get a little bit of pace ahead of them, they could easily just jump into the pits and what have you. No, it cuts off all debate. Teams will look for any way to cut seconds off the in-lap. The note explicitly bans also cutting the chicane on your way to the pits to jump a rival on the delta. It could cut maybe 4 seconds off your lap time. Quite the advantage, I would say. Yeah, pulling off a good strategy through the pit stops, yeah, that's very much welcomed by the FIA, but using a creative geography by completely forgetting a chicane, no, that's not welcome at all. It has now become, in the words of Martin Brundle, a slam dunk penalty. Personally, I think it's a good idea. It means that we could get some more overtakes pulled off, or at least cleaner overtakes. Drivers will know where they stand around that chicane, and that anything but cutting the chicane itself will far less likely result in the stewards giving them a penalty. It gives the attacking driver more confidence in which to pull off a daring move legitimately, and that means it also gives the defending driver a little bit less of a leg to stand on. It means that as long as the driver hasn't cut the chicane, then, well, they've got the corner. So therefore, the defending line must be tidier. You can't just completely run wide or cut the chicane to avoid a driver making the move, because then you could easily lose the corner anyway, and then you've lost a few seconds to the car in front of you. It completely compromises your race. But now you're probably wanting to know, what does Max Verstappen think about this entire thing? Well, for an FIA press conference, Max was actually quite verbose, considering his stance with the governing body and all, and it wasn't a negative response. So here you are, here it is for your consideration. I guess it can go both ways, where it can be quite straightforward, or it can go completely crazy because of safety cars coming into play or not, making the right calls. I think it will spice it up probably a bit more. Normally, when you have that one stop, once you have a good pit stop and everything is fine, then you drive to the end, and you just have to stay focused and not hit the barrier. Maybe with the two stop you can create something different, people gambling, guessing when the right time is to box, and hopefully it will spice it up a bit more. In short, what Max is saying here is that this is worth trying. He's not dismissing it, and that is huge since this rule isn't permanent. If it works, this could be copied elsewhere, maybe other street circuits. If not, it's gone by Monday. Anyway, comment below. I am really rather curious. What do you think of this two-stop rule, and what other track could actually stand to benefit from it if this is then brought into that particular Grand Prix event? And what Max said that was really intriguing to me is that it could liven up the second half of the Monaco Grand Prix, which he himself said could easily become dull. Adding a second stop forces people to gamble on when to pit, especially if there are no safety cars or red flags that could make any cameos. So it is quite a valid talking point considering where we've just been, where everyone was afraid that the Imola Grand Prix would once again be a bore fest, there wouldn't be any overtaking, and it would be relatively processional. But then it turned out to be the complete opposite. What we feared didn't happen, and it turned out to be one of the most interesting races of the season, with plenty of really good overtakes. And not, let's forget, Yuki's good fight back from P20 to P10, which was very commendable. And then suddenly, people who was thinking, oh, thank goodness, we're about to see the back of Imola because it really doesn't belong in modern F1, are now suddenly going, no, don't go! We only just got to know you! Maybe it's just a case, as the old song goes, you didn't know what you got till it was gone. And then it turns out that maybe it could have easily stuck around, but then we find out in terms of the financial side of things, Imola didn't even come close to breaking even, it needing around, according to various sources, $60 million in which to do so. That's what F1 is asking the track and the organisers and the sponsors to stump up for it. It could barely get anywhere close to that, and it turned out to be record attendance. So it was completely impossible for them to be able to continue, and it most likely will never come back, unless there is a brand new owner of Formula One, which is a little bit less, cash happy. Yes, indeed, it is a sad reality, but it is the reality that we are living in, that even though you're a classic track and you do have a legacy within the sport, if you're not sustainable financially speaking, then sorry, you're out on your bum. So yes, Monaco may be a controversial fixture for some, but it is a classic, which is why the debate about its legitimacy in a modern F1 calendar may start to relax if this rule turns out to be a success. Yes, it's not the most exciting of tracks in general, and could easily stand to have maybe some modifications made to it, which means that we might be able to see a second DRS zone. But it has been around the F1 calendar since the beginning, and since we are losing many legacy tracks or they're going on rotation, many people probably can't stand to face using yet another one. But regardless, Max Verstappen being in support of this two-stop mandate, at least for the time being, that's a win for the FIA, quite frankly, because there have been so many incidents related to Max Verstappen where he's blasted the FIA or played them at their own game, that him actually being quite passive about it and interested and intrigued, yeah, that's not bad. That being said, there are some drivers that aren't quite as optimistic as Verstappen, and you just get the sense that there are some rumblings out there that we could easily see team orders coming into play, where one driver from a particular team is sacrificed, and that means the other driver who may outqualify them could easily have a run at some better points. And considering that Williams have been really struggling with communication issues the last few races with their two big-name drivers, I think that they could easily be served a big mistake if they don't completely understand all of the opportunities and strategies before the race begins. And Carlos Sainz has been the more vocal one to talk about this particular matter, as he says here. There's an element of lottery that Monaco can always offer. I think this year that element is going to be a bit bigger given the two-stop rather than the one-stop. I think the drivers will probably force us potentially to push a bit more. I'm just a bit worried of teams playing a bit too much with the pace to help the other teammates. I hope there's not too many gimmicks with that, but it's a 1-2. And yeah, that's pretty loaded actually, Carlos. And what he means by playing a bit too much with the pace is that he reckons that teams might exploit the rule by having one car deliberately slow the field to benefit the other. And he hopes those team game tactics do not turn the race into something artificial. Yet he does accept that the rule change could either improve the show or open the door to those gimmicks. To be fair, it is a trade-off in trying to make sure that the race isn't dull for everyone concerned. I mean, except for those who use the Monaco Grand Prix for window dressing and then they just have a glass of wine or champagne, they talk to their other rich celebrities, and oh, the F1 cars, that's just background noise, they don't care what happens on the track, so long as they get their second serving of bubbly. And again, I am seriously concerned that Williams do bottle this in terms of communication. I really hope they have stepped things up since Miami. But Sainz's fears come from when Alonso became the world's fastest roadblock around Monaco a few years ago, where the track map saw a huge gulf between he and the rest of the pack, on a track where you can lap several seconds slow without losing a single position. Using one car to protect the other has always been a realistic play. But now this two-stop rule, it makes it even more attractive to try and pull off. And Monaco isn't the only place where we've seen this happen before. because we saw last year around Jeddah, when points were really scarce for the midfield, when they were realistically just locked into the top 4 plus Aston Martin, we saw Haas pull this off with Kevin Magnussen, him running off the track at some points, slowing down Tsunoda and others behind him by upwards of 2 seconds a lap, which then guaranteed Nico Hülkenberg to come home in P10. And that was a very valuable point for Haas, and this was all technically within the rules. Even though, by going off track and gaining an advantage, Magnussen himself got a 10-second penalty. I think the first recipient of that going up from 5 seconds to 10, but it didn't matter. He didn't lose any points. Nico got to keep his. No, it was worth it for Haas at that time. And yes, Sainz is very qualified to talk about this because, in Silverstone 2022, he was about to be asked by Ferrari to do the same thing of slowing things down so that Leclerc would benefit, and that was the place which birthed the quote from Sainz of "stop inventing." He ultimately defied that order and then went on to win that Grand Prix, his very first one, and that didn't go down well with the Tifosi, even though a Ferrari was on the top step of the dais. It wasn't their golden boy, and it did throw into question whether or not Sainz was truly a Ferrari driver or whether he was just self-facing. And then in Singapore, he slowed down strategically to help Norris fend off both rampaging Mercedes, which would then see the Ferrari driver win that particular Grand Prix, the only non-Red Bull driver to score that year. And it's become one of the most ingenious plans in recent memory. Yeah, Sainz called the move cheeky, but it was legit. And the fact is, though, that this loophole has not been closed, that we have not seen some kind of minimal green flag delta for teams to run to make sure that you don't get the situation where you end up becoming the modern interpretation of a trolley train. So therefore, this particular exploit is still a major part of any team's arsenal. So do expect that to happen. You just got to wonder, well, which team and driver is going to be the one to do it. And because Monaco is so narrow, it only makes that particular loophole even bigger, not smaller. The Nouvelle Chicane thing has done some way to try and negate some potential scenarios. Now, okay, you might be wondering why I didn't talk about all of this during my Tuesday prediction video. Well, at the time, it was a little bit of an unknown, and we didn't really have the opinions of the drivers. They weren't really talking about it, at least not in great detail. But now that we've had the media day, we have now got plenty of quotes to pass through, and many of the drivers are like, okay, well, let's just suck it and see, effectively. But then you have had people like Verstappen, like Sainz, etc., who have been a little bit more vocal about the potential consequences of it, and that's why I wanted to make this video today, because we could easily see this particular race go completely off script, and if it works well, as the FIA hoped, it could save the Monaco Grand Prix. There'd be far fewer comments about people wanting to get rid of it, in that it has something unique about it. And yes, of course, the further up you go the grid, the more drivers and teams will be more likely to sigh and go like, oh, we gotta work harder. Yeah, Saturday has become a little bit less important, but it is still very important because there is no guarantee of a safety car or a red flag. The safety car around here is about a 50-50 shot. There's a little bit more jeopardy when it comes to reaching your final destination. There are other things to consider though. Sure, I don't mind this two-stop enforcement, but it does seem a little bit artificial. There could have been more organic alternatives of maybe making use of the tyres available and having this race be the trial run of stepped compounds. Something that Pirelli and the FIA are planning to introduce for maybe the Austrian Grand Prix, one that I'm actually going to be attending, so if you are there, do come up to me and say hi. I'll have a little mini ladder ready to go. But the fact is, though, is that this could have easily been the experimental testbed for having compounds like C6, C4, C2, instead of it just being sequential like C6, 5 and 4. It means there's a bigger gap between the compounds, which means that you have to think a little bit more carefully with your strategies, that maybe you can't do your one-stop. You could do some kind of mandate by everyone starting on a completely fresh set of C6s handed to them on the Sunday morning to then use at the start, that everyone has to start on it, and then they go from there. Yes, it's not as optimal as maybe running the medium, but if the medium were a C4 and it was some way slower than the C6, then it could be a strategical guide and really illustrate how each team and driver handles the Pirelli tyres, and show how much they can be subjected to graining. It does have a catch maybe in that one-stops could still happen since the C2 would be more than hard enough to last a full race distance. But that would all depend on whether or not you had a really hot Monaco Grand Prix weekend, and we're not going to be having that. I think the maximum it's going to get on Sunday will be like 18 degrees, so there would be a chance if we had the C2 tyre as the hard tyre that it wouldn't turn on. It wouldn't get to full operating temperature, that they'd be too cold. You could lock up. You wouldn't be going fast. You'd be really slow. So I think that could have easily worked, and you'd be just using the tyres, and that would be it. It'd be far more straightforward and far less, draconian, or like, this is the rule. Having said that, though, there are still some other ways that this could easily be exploited, and maybe this is part of the thrill of the Monaco Grand Prix this year, that maybe people are less excited about the racing itself because the overtakes are not going to be guaranteed. It'll be like, I want to see how the teams exploit this and gamify it for their own benefit. What's going on up there? Because ultimately, if the rulebook has got nothing that could easily stop you pulling off a particular exploit, then it's fair game. Because for starters, anyone in the back that would not stand a hope in hell of getting out of Q1, or maybe not getting any higher than 14th or something like that, so maybe both the Saubers, they could maybe start the race and double stack before lap 1 had finished, but the race had started. It would count as the first of their 2 mandatory stops. That would mean, since the pack is still relatively bunched up at the front, the Saubers could attempt to run in clean air for a bit, less likely to scuff up their tyres, and then maybe pray for a safety car, which again is a bit of a 50-50. And then they could just come in again, bolt on some hards, and then cruise home. Heck, I recall Bernie Collins saying this right when this rule was then introduced after the council meeting, that maybe teams could just pull in for their first pit stop, put a soft tyre on, and then come in just a couple of laps later, and therefore if they do run a safety car, they could just elect to stay out, gain track position, and then the teams ahead of them, or the drivers, would then have to come in again because they've only just done the one stop, and then they could easily gain an advantage in that regard. There are so many permutations here that you could use to bring a car that would be very unlikely to score points right up to the front. Yes, you wouldn't have ended up scoring due to pure performance alone, but you'd have a team that would be unlikely to score anything right up there. It would be a break from the norm, so therefore the fans would be just going, yay, it wasn't a formulaic result, there was some sort of thinking going on. So, for Monaco, would you take that? And yes, this is allowed within the rules, because I don't think there is any stipulation in the Formula 1 regulations, like there is in Formula 2 for the feature race, that you cannot stop before a particular lap. And I think, really, they will have to learn a thing or two. So I think the next time, if they ever do this 2-stop mandate, there will have to be a minimum pit stop number before you can then come in. There is, of course, the idea that I talked about with Sainz, and people could easily slow down to benefit the other driver. But then, of course, there is the matter of the red flag, which caused the situation last year to take place. That's Snowfest, meaning that there was no pit stops required for when the race got started again. And therefore, you got times that were not that far off the Formula 2 cars. So this was literally a situation where you had cars that were effectively running with GP2 engines. Yes, something had to be done about what happened last year, but that red flag loophole still exists. And I think it will continue to exist for the rest of time, because anyone who would dare think about maybe getting rid of it would then receive massive blowback from the FIA going, wait! Safety! Can't really argue against safety, that it would be much safer to just bolt on fresh tyres that are 100% fit to go racing, rather than just continue with an old set of tyres that could maybe easily go bang, or completely fail, you crash, you injure yourself, you damage spectators maybe. And according to race fans, it would be a win-win regardless of whether the race would even resume from that race flag or not. If it did resume, then the field is bunched up, you've done your stops. And even if it doesn't resume, those who would have failed to complete both their stops, or hadn't stopped at all, would be penalised in the form of a time penalty. 30 seconds if one stop had yet to have been made, and a whole minute for those who hadn't served both of them. I think you lose maybe between 19 to 21 seconds when you come in, do your stop, and then go out again. So losing 30 seconds for having not done a lap, that would be a huge, big boost of losing time. A lot of people near the front maybe, or at the back or wherever, could easily just do their stops right at the beginning, and therefore they wouldn't run the risk of a time penalty if it suddenly gets curtailed. You have such a big accident that it just can't continue after 5 laps, and then boom. Yeah, you won't score as many points, but you could easily maybe find yourself up in the points, whereas otherwise you would have been right at the back. Worth a try. And you want to know another symptom of all of this? What could happen is that if you get a situation where everyone comes in on the first or second lap, the pit lane would be rammed. It's one of the smallest on the grid. It would be bedlam. It would be absolute mayhem. It would be really, really unsafe. You would have those unsafe releases, kind of like what you had with Kimi and Max in Miami, but tenfold. So many personnel knocking around there, even though it still has the 60km/h speed limit and all, you're going to have an accident, either with a car or a person. So Really, there would have to be some means to police how many cars could come into the pit lane at any one time, but then how would you police it? It would be an absolute mess. It would be a quagmire. There are so many unknowns to be had here, which already in of itself, as you can tell from my tone, which means that, hey, I'm invested in this weekend. Is that all that matters, really? That we're talking about this instead of just thinking, oh, no, okay, let's just wait for Spain. But it does mean that with every safety car, with every pit stop, the whole race could completely turn on its head. We'll all be wondering what will happen, how the rules will be mastered, how the tyres will fare, and how the Monaco Grand Prix will be a perfectly balanced race with no exploits. This is all part of an experiment, a live experiment made by the FIA, and if it turns out to be a success and people are excited about it and thank the FIA for imposing this rule, then it could easily be spread to other circuits which do suffer from major one-stop problems and, don't really afford a little bit of strategical jeopardy. It guarantees more pit lane activity, more interesting tyre choices, which I think would have been made even better if we do run with that Pirelli stepped strategy that they hope to bring in for the rest of the season after the second half. Pretty much everyone below maybe P6 stands to gain something out of this, that they can maybe score some big points. The only people who'd be even close to complaining, I think, would be the McLarens, that they being able to master the C6, get a good lap in qualifying, and then run with those C6 for a good number of laps. Even if they are able to get some time ahead and then they pit in, there's no telling whether or not they could actually guarantee a 1-2. There is that degree of uncertainty. Thank you. We wouldn't have to resort to what Bernie Ecclestone said one time to spice things up, of installing sprinklers next to the track. And the best thing about this for the FIA and the president? The drivers aren't complaining about it. They're actually thinking this could be very interesting, that it could make things really curious, that they won't be bored. So Ben's thinking, great, the drivers don't hate me. But the easiest thing that could ruin it and make things a little bit boring or a little bit unfair for some is that if you get one person choosing to be this year's particular roadblock, because that loophole has not been closed, it is still there. There will be at least one team or driver who will do it. The question is, though, who will be the one to do it? And again, you could maybe impose a minimum green flag delta, but who's to say that maybe a driver might justify them going slower than that green flag delta by them just going, oh no, we've got a problem with the car, that there's something wrong, which means that we can't go as fast. And then by the time you get to Parc Fermé, when the FIA can scrutinize it, they'll say, oh no, we miraculously fixed it over the air, or it just mended itself. So, how can you then, investigate it or something? Yeah, that could easily be an exploit in of itself. In the end, we might end up with a Monaco Grand Prix that isn't a traditional race as we are accustomed to. It may be just simply a game of 3D chess, so maybe we just have to take a look at this race from another angle. That we can't look at it as a conventional Grand Prix, but we've just got to see of this being a test of strategical brains. It may not be the one who has the most raw pace that wins this race. It will just be the one who has the most opportunities to gain places or survive near the front. And considering that this is Monaco, should we just roll with it, really? That, it's better than nothing. At least we won't have a repeat of last year. I mean, it's been better than doing nothing at all. Much like how Yuki Tsunoda was better for Red Bull than them doing nothing at all and risking alienating Liam Lawson even more. To find out why I think there are many mixed messages coming out of the second Red Bull seat at the moment between the fans, the drivers and the press, watch this video next, straight after this one.